78, and there's one sentence I avoided for 3 decades. It was simple, only 3 syllables, and yet it cost me 30 years of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Tuesdays that make a life. I told myself it could wait. I told myself time would soften the edges and carry us back to each other. Instead, silence hardened into stone and pride set like concrete. I was busy, important, successful, and deeply wrong. The sentence? I am sorry. Those 3 words could have saved us, but I chose victory over connection, and the bill arrived with interest. Again, I avoided that conversation with my younger brother, Daniel. We were 2 years apart and competitive from the first report card. He was the quiet one with a steady gaze. I was the talker with a plan for everything. Our rivalry was mostly harmless until the year our mother got sick and our father asked us to run the family business together. I said yes with conditions. Daniel said yes without a speech. Then came the expansion, the bank meetings, the tiny humiliations that fester when no one names them. We both kept score. I wanted to win. So badly. The final break came on a Wednesday in late autumn, the kind of afternoon that smells like cold metal and burnt coffee. An invoice went missing, a supplier threatened penalties, and I accused Daniel of sloppiness in front of our staff. He said nothing for a beat, then asked me to step into the storage room. He held up a folder I had misfiled and said, very quietly, "You owe me an apology." I felt my throat close around pride. I said he was overreacting. I said leadership required toughness. I said a lot of things that were excuses. Only, Daniel resigned the next morning. He left his key on my desk, shook our bookkeeper's hand, and walked out without a scene. I told everyone we were restructuring. I told myself he would cool off and come back. Our father called me that night. He did not yell. He asked a single question. "Did you apologize?" I said I would when he apologized for walking out. My father sighed the way old houses sigh before winter. "Son, do you want to be right? Or do you want to be brothers?" Ich chose rightness. That choice cost me 3 decades. Forever. Years unspooled like thread from a spool, thin at first, then tangled beyond repair. Daniel married. I did not go. He had a daughter. I sent a gift with no note. Our mother died. We stood on opposite sides of her casket, pretending to study the flowers. When people asked, I said families are complicated. When I was alone, I said I would call him tomorrow. Tomorrow is the longest word in the English language. I learned to live around the gap. I built bigger numbers, signed bigger deals, and never dialed his number. "I'm sorry" stayed unsaid. Always. There's a special loneliness that hides inside success. You shake hands, answer emails, toast milestones, and go home to a house that echoes. People think distance grows from hatred. More often, it grows from fear. I was afraid of being small. I was afraid that apologizing meant surrendering the story of who I believed I was. So I chose the mask. The mask worked in conference rooms and broke at midnight. Trophies do not visit. Plaques do not call on Sundays. All the while, the apology aged like unopened wine, turning from promise to waste with every season. Slowly. Here is something I learned too late. Silence is not neutral. When you do not speak, you're still saying something. You're saying the other person is not worth the discomfort of your humility. Saying the story you tell yourself is more precious than the person you grew up with. I did not mean to say those things, but I said them every day I did not call. It is astonishing how ordinary days can do extraordinary damage. Not with drama, with drift. 1 inch today becomes a canyon in 30 years. And it fools you. Daily. Our father died 6 years after Daniel left. We stood at the graveside again, 2 men with pockets full of unsent sentences. I could have stepped over the grass and said the 3 words. I held my breath until the moment passed, then told myself funeral days are not for hard conversations. Another lie. The day after the burial, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank card and a pen. I wrote his name and nothing else. The card stayed blank for months. Then life resumed its loudness, and the quiet grew heavier. Heavier than I could admit. 10 years later, a letter arrived with careful handwriting on thick paper. It was from Daniel's daughter, whom I had never met. She invited me to her wedding, writing that her father would like me there if I wanted to come. The words were generous and impossibly gentle. I stared at the date for a long time. I told myself showing up without a real apology would be selfish. Then I told myself my presence would cause drama. Beneath both ideas was the same fear. I did not go. The next month, my cardiologist mentioned my stress. He was right. A year after that, the phone rang late. An unfamiliar voice introduced herself as the same daughter, now with a last name I did not know. She said, "My dad is sick. We thought you should know." I sat down on the kitchen floor, the tile cold through my socks. I asked what kind. She said the kind that makes calendars small. I thanked her. I hung up. I picked the phone back up. I stared at my brother's number for a full minute, then pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A click. His voice. Older, thinner, careful. "Hey," he said, someone opening a door a few inches. "This is Daniel." I froze, then said his name like a question. He asked who was calling, and I said mine, my own name tasting unfamiliar in my mouth. He didn't hang up. He didn't welcome me either. There was a space, a quiet we had earned the hard way. I filled it with the one sentence I should have said 30 years earlier and still somehow couldn't shape. Instead, I asked how he was doing. He answered with facts, not feelings. Diagnosis, prognosis, which doctor, which trial. I listened like a student who finally showed up to class. He did not ask about the business. He did not ask if I was well. He asked a single question that surprised me by how gentle it sounded. "Why are you calling?" There are 1,000 wrong answers to that question, and I picked 999 of them before stopping myself. I said, "Because I should have called a long time ago." The line was quiet. I could hear the breath at the mouthpiece. The wet rattle sickness sometimes gives to living. "All right," he said. "What now?" I asked if I could come by. He offered a day and a time in that practical way people use when there's no point wasting the days that remain. I wrote the address on an envelope because that was what I had in front of me. When I hung up, I stared at my phone like it might scold me. Then I did something I had not done since the night he left. I said the 3 words out loud to an empty room just to learn how they felt in my throat. "I'm sorry." The words sat there, almost weightless, and still somehow heavy enough to change the furniture of a life. Drive over the past road shotgun. I rehearsed. I revised. I imagined dramatic speeches that would make us both cry and fix the unfixable. I arrived with a pocket full of prepared sentences that belonged in a movie and not in the room where my brother waited. He opened the door. We looked old to each other. Lines where there used to be plans. His hair was the winter version of the boy I used to race to the mailbox. He smiled like a man who had learned the cost of smiling too brightly. We stood there, 2 statues with beating hearts, and then he stepped aside. His living room smelled like tea and orange peels. A blanket lay across the couch with the crease of a body that had spent a lot of afternoons there. There were photographs on a shelf I had never seen, a wedding I missed, vacations I wasn't invited to, a child I didn't send birthday cards to becoming a teenager, then a woman. I didn't belong to this museum, and yet every frame hurt like home. He gestured toward a chair. We sat. For a minute, we talked about nothing. Then I ruined it by reaching for safe terrain. I started to explain the day in the storage room. "I don't want the footnotes," he said quietly. He looked tired the way high mountains look tired. "I wanted your respect. Failing that, I wanted your apology. And then I just wanted peace." His voice was a carpenter's tool, simple and exact. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't performing. He was making the room honest. I had to decide who I was going to be inside that honesty. I took a breath that felt like carrying a box upstairs. I put down every sentence I had rehearsed. I looked at my brother and finally said the only words worth saying, "I am sorry." The sentence arrived late and undressed. No argument. No explanations. Just the bare apology I should have offered when he held up the folder. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping. Not theatrical, just true. He nodded. He didn't rescue me from my discomfort. He let it do its work. Then he said something that loosened a knot I had been feeding for decades. "I was never your rival." He paused. "I was your brother." It's incredible how a line like that can reorder a nervous system. The world rearranged itself around a fact I had refused to see. We talked, for real this time, not like litigators. like men who understood their inventory of days. He told me about the years I missed. His daughter's first bike crash, the way she sings off-key in the car, the winter he learned to make soup, the camping trip where the tent leaked and they laughed under a trash bag like teenagers. He told me he had almost called me a dozen times and hung up at the last ring. He told me he had carried a box of my letters to the trash twice and put it back on the shelf both times. I told him I had none to carry. Then, because we were not saints even on deadline, we stumbled. I reached for a story about the business, a story that made me look good. He went quiet in that way people do when they're being asked to congratulate the person who hurt them. I caught myself. I took the story apart and put it back together without me as the hero. We started again. Slowly. Gently. That afternoon, we opened 30 years of windows and let the stale air out. It did not fix everything. It did change the weather. That is often the most honest version of a miracle. Before I left, he walked me to the door. We stood there like boys again, pretending the goodbye was casual so we wouldn't feel how not casual it was. I asked if I could come back. He said yes, then added, "Don't make the next visit a eulogy." Promised I wouldn't. Promises. I kept my promise. I didn't wait for a eulogy. I came back the next Tuesday with oranges and the good tea he liked, and we sat in the late light, naming small things that felt like treasures. How the dog preferred the warm spot on the rug. How the neighbor's wind chimes sounded like a polite laugh. How a body could be tired and a soul still curious. We did not try to make up the years. We made a day, then another. He showed me the garden he planted the year I didn't call. The rosemary had gone woody, the tomatoes stubborn and sweet. He laughed at himself for overwatering, then at me for giving advice like a foreman. I let him laugh. We learned to be beginners again. The ritual became ordinary. I would brew, he would peel an orange, we would sit quietly and listen for the sentence that wanted to arrive. Sometimes it was a memory. Sometimes it was a question. Sometimes it was a silence we finally named. On a warm afternoon in May, he said, "There's another thing you never said." I braced for an indictment and got a gift. He said, "You never told me you needed me." The words landed like rain on ash. I had built a life around not needing anyone, and it had kept me safe and starving. I looked at him and said, "I do. I always did." He nodded like a man closing a gate gently. We didn't fix the past. We gave the future a different shape. We called his daughter and put the phone on speaker and told stories that made her laugh in that relieved way people laugh when a room gets more oxygen. I apologized to her, too, for the chairs I left empty in her life. She cried, and then she invited me to Sunday dinners. I brought dessert and listened more than I spoke. I learned the sound of ordinary grace. Some days were kind, some were not. Illness is an editor. It cuts what doesn't matter. We stopped pretending we were immortal and started acting like neighbors of the present. When he was strong enough, we walked to the corner and back. It wasn't we named clouds. I asked the question I had avoided for 30 years. How did it feel when I didn't call? He said, like being erased in slow motion. I told him I would spend the rest of my days redrawing the lines. Daniel died in late summer, with the windows open and music low. I was there, not at a podium, but at his bedside, holding a hand I should never have let go. Grief came, yes, but it did not carry the poison of if only. We had spent our last months telling the truth. That does not remove sorrow. It removes the sentence, the one that begins with someday. Call tonight. Say the 3 words first and skip the explanations. Please.